The cantina on Kepler's Rest smelled like old metal and spilled drinks. Commander Vex Thara sat alone in the corner, her cybernetic arm clicking softly as she lifted another glass of kelp wine to her lips. The blue liquid burned going down, but not as much as the memories that haunted her every day. At the bar, 3 young Zephyrian soldiers laughed loudly. Their uniforms were crisp and new, without a single battle scar between them. Vex Thara tried to ignore them, but their voices carried across the dim room. "I heard the humans fought with metal projectiles," said the tallest one, his voice full of mock surprise. "Can you believe that? Metal bullets against plasma weapons? It must have been like fighting children." 70? His friend nodded eagerly. "My instructor said they barely lasted 6 months before surrendering. Primitive species always do. They just don't understand real warfare." The third soldier slammed his drink down. "I wish I could have been there. Would have shown those soft pink creatures what Zephyrian strength really looks like. One plasma burst and they would have run crying back to their little blue planet." Vex Thara's cybernetic hand crushed her glass. The sound of breaking crystal made the entire cantina fall silent. She stood up slowly, her mechanical leg whirring as it adjusted to her weight. Every eye in the room turned to look at her. The 3 young soldiers stared at her scarred face and missing limbs. Her left arm was completely artificial, a complex network of metal and circuits that moved with precise mechanical precision. Her right leg had been replaced from the knee down, and burned scars covered half her face where her helmet had melted during a human plasma grenade attack. "Excuse me," she said, her voice quiet and dangerous. The tall soldier straightened up, trying to look confident. "I said they were weak. Everyone knows that. The war lasted less than a year, because they couldn't handle real combat." Vex Thara walked toward them, her mechanical leg making small clicking sounds with each step. The cantina remained deadly silent. Even the bartender stopped cleaning glasses. "Less than a year?" she repeated. "Is that what they teach in the academy now?" The young soldier's confidence started to fade. "Well, yes. The Terran-Zephyrian conflict was brief, because of our superior technology and tactics." Vex Thara stopped right in front of their table. Up close, they could see every scar on her face, every piece of metal that had replaced her original body parts. Her cybernetic eye glowed softly in the dim light. "I fought humans for 3 years," she said. 3 long, bloody, horrible years. And let me tell you something, young warriors, everything you think you know about humans is wrong." The second soldier tried to speak up. "But, Commander, our plasma weapons were clearly superior to their primitive kinetic firearms." The tactical reports showed. The tactical reports were written by people who never faced a human in battle, Vex Thara interrupted. People who never watched their best friends die because they underestimated those primitive creatures. People who never spent 72 hours straight being hunted by humans who refused to sleep, refused to eat, refused to give up. She pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. Her cybernetic arm moved with mechanical precision as she gestured to the bartender for another drink. "You want to know about humans?" she asked. "You want to know why I have more metal than flesh in my body? You want to know why half my unit never came home?" The 3 soldiers exchanged nervous glances. Other patrons in the cantina had started moving closer, drawn by the intensity in her voice. Word was spreading that Commander Vex Thara, the legendary veteran of the Outer Rim campaigns, was about to tell her story. "I was just like you once," she continued. "Young, confident, sure that our superior technology would make the war easy. I had been through the academy, trained with the best instructors, commanded elite troops. I thought I understood warfare. The bartender brought her another glass of kelp wine. She stared into the blue liquid as if seeing ghosts in its depths. "My first engagement with human forces was at the Crimson Nebula. Our intelligence said it would be simple. Humans had inferior weapons. Basic armor. No energy shields. We expected to crush them in hours and move on to the next system. Her cybernetic eye flickered as she accessed old battle records stored in her neural implants. The memories came flooding back like they always did, sharp and painful and impossible to forget. I remember laughing when I saw their equipment through my targeting scope. Metal bullets, chemical explosives, projectile weapons that our great-grandparents might have used. Their ships were ugly, blocky things held together with welds and prayers. Our sleek plasma cruisers could have cut them apart without breaking formation. She took another drink and continued. We thought it would be a massacre, and it was. Just not the kind we expected. The young soldiers leaned forward despite themselves. Around the cantina, other veterans had stopped their conversations to listen. Everyone knew Commander Vex's Thara's reputation, but few had ever heard her speak about the war. The first thing that surprised us was their retreat, she said. When we opened fire, they didn't panic. They didn't break formation. They pulled back in perfect order, covering each other, making us work for every meter of space. Our tactical computers said it was a sign of cowardice. We should have known better. Her mechanical fingers drummed against the table with soft metallic taps. Humans don't retreat because they're afraid. They retreat because they're thinking. They were studying us, learning our weapon patterns, figuring out our weaknesses. While we celebrated our easy victory, they were preparing for round 2. She stood up abruptly, her cybernetic leg whirring as it supported her weight. You want to hear about the real humans? The ones who taught me what war actually means? The ones who showed me that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one who refuses to accept that they're supposed to lose? The cantina was completely silent now. Even the background music had stopped. Then sit down, young warriors, and let me tell you about the Battle of Crimson Nebula. Let me tell you about the day I learned that humans don't fight like any other species in the galaxy. Let me tell you about the day I realized that everything we thought we knew about warfare was about to change forever. She walked back to her corner table, and the 3 young soldiers followed her without a word, their earlier bravado completely forgotten. Vex Thara settled into her chair and closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, they held the distant look of someone seeing into the past. The Crimson Nebula was supposed to be our first easy victory, she began. 3 Zephyrian battle cruisers against a single human convoy. Our ships had full energy shields, plasma cannons that could melt through asteroid rock, and targeting computers that could hit a coin from 1,000 kilometers away. She gestured with her cybernetic hand, the metal fingers moving smoothly as she described the battle formation. The humans had 6 cargo ships and 2 escort vessels. Old, ugly things that looked like they had been built in a scrapyard. Their weapons were kinetic railguns and missile pods. Primitive technology that any first-year academy student could have designed. The young soldiers listened carefully. Around them, other cantina patrons had quietly moved closer, forming a loose circle around their table. Veterans recognized the story, but they still wanted to hear it told by someone who had been there. Our battle plan was simple, Vex Thara continued. Close to optimal range, engage shields, and systematically destroy their ships with plasma fire. The tactical computer estimated total engagement time at 12 minutes. We expected complete victory, with 0 casualties on our side. She paused to take another drink. The first sign that something was wrong came when we opened fire. Our plasma bolts should have punched straight through their hulls. Instead, they hit some kind of adaptive armor that seemed to absorb and disperse the energy. Not completely, but enough to keep their ships functional. Her cybernetic eye glowed brighter as she accessed more detailed memories. The second surprise was their return fire. Those primitive railguns were firing projectiles at incredible speeds. The rounds themselves were simple metal slugs, but they were hitting our shields at precisely calculated angles. She held up her artificial arm. You see, our energy shields were designed to stop plasma and directed energy weapons. They worked by creating an electromagnetic field that deflected charged particles. But kinetic projectiles? Solid matter with no electrical charge? The shields barely slowed them down. One of the young soldiers spoke up. But surely our armor could handle simple metal projectiles? Vex Thera smiled grimly. That's what we thought too, until we realized those metal projectiles were specifically designed to penetrate Zephyrian hull plating. The humans had studied our ship designs, analyzed our metallurgy, and created ammunition that could punch through our defenses like they weren't even there. She touched the scars on her face. The first railgun round that hit my cruiser went straight through our primary shield generator. The second one took out our main plasma cannon. The third one breached our hull and killed 6 of my crew members instantly. The cantina was so quiet that everyone could hear the soft whirring of her mechanical leg as she shifted in her chair. But the real shock came when we tried to retreat, she continued. Our ships were faster than theirs. Our engines more advanced. We should have been able to pull back, regroup, and attack from a different angle. But the humans didn't let us. Her voice grew quieter, more intense. They pursued us through the nebula for 18 hours. 18 hours of constant harassment, hit-and-run attacks, precision strikes on our engines and weapon systems. Every time we tried to stop and fight, they would disappear into the gas clouds. Every time we tried to run, they would appear again and hit us where it hurt most. She looked directly at the 3 young soldiers. You know what the worst part was? We never saw the humans themselves. Just their ships, their weapons, their impossible accuracy. But somehow, they felt more real to me than any enemy I had ever faced. Her cybernetic hand closed into a fist. During those 18 hours, I started to understand something that our tactical manuals never taught us. Humans don't fight like other species. They don't follow the standard patterns of engagement and retreat that our computers are programmed to expect. She opened her hand again, revealing small stress fractures in the metal. Other species fight until they reach an acceptable loss ratio, then withdraw to preserve their forces. It's logical, efficient, mathematically sound. Humans fight until they win, no matter what it costs them. A veteran at a nearby table nodded grimly. He had fought humans too, and he knew exactly what she meant. After 18 hours, my task force was down to 1 barely functioning cruiser. Vex Thera said. Our shields were gone, our main weapons destroyed, our hull breached in 12 different places. By every logical standard, we had lost. We should have surrendered. She laughed bitterly. But the humans didn't demand surrender. They didn't even hail us. They just kept attacking, methodically destroying every system that could possibly be used for weapons or communication. It was like they were surgeons, carefully taking apart a patient while keeping them alive. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. And then, suddenly, they stopped. One moment we were taking constant fire, and the next moment, there was complete silence. No more railgun rounds, no more missile strikes, nothing. She touched her scarred face again. That's when I realized the most terrifying thing about humans. They had never been trying to destroy us completely. They had been demonstrating their capabilities, showing us exactly how helpless we were against opponents who really understood warfare. The young soldiers stared at her in shock. This was not the story they had been told in the academy. The humans had been studying us from the moment the war began, she continued. Every battle, every engagement, every tactical decision we made was being analyzed and catalogued. They were learning our strengths and weaknesses faster than we could adapt to theirs. She finished her drink and set the glass down carefully. When rescue ships finally found us 3 days later, we discovered something else. The human convoy we had attacked? It was bait. A deliberately tempting target designed to lure Zephyrian forces into engagement so they could test their new weapons and tactics. Her cybernetic eye dimmed slightly. That was my first lesson about humans. They don't just fight wars. They study them, learn from them, and use every piece of information to become more effective. What we saw as primitive technology was actually sophisticated engineering designed specifically to counter our advantages. She looked around the cantina at all the faces watching her. And that was just the beginning. The Battle of Crimson Nebula was nothing compared to what came next. Because once the humans had figured out how to neutralize our technological superiority, they started showing us what they were really capable of. The silence stretched on for long moments before one of the young soldiers finally found his voice. "What happened next, Commander?" Vex Thara's expression grew even more serious. Next came the siege of Titan's Gate. And that's where I learned that humans don't just refuse to lose. They refuse to quit. Vex Thara signaled for another drink before continuing her story. The bartender moved quietly, not wanting to disturb the tense atmosphere that had settled over the cantina. Titan's Gate was a human mining station built into a massive asteroid, she said. Strategic location. Controlling the shipping lanes between 3 star systems. Command decided it had to be taken, and they gave me a full assault fleet to do it. She traced patterns on the table with her cybernetic finger. 12 heavy cruisers, 48 fighters, and 3,000 of our best assault troops. Against a mining station with maybe 200 human defenders. It should have been over in hours. Ow. Ow. Her mechanical eye flickered as she accessed the painful memories. Surrounded the asteroid, cut off all supply lines, and began systematic bombardment of their defensive positions. Our plan was to starve them out, then move in for final assault when they were too weak to resist effectively. One of the young soldiers leaned forward. "That sounds like solid tactics, Commander." "It would have been against any other species," Vex Thara replied. "Zephyrians would have surrendered after a week without supplies. Keltorians would have tried to negotiate after 3 days. Even the proud Vrex warriors would have attempted a breakout assault before accepting slow death by starvation." She paused to take a sip of her fresh drink. Humans did none of these things. They just waited. The silence in the cantina grew heavier as she continued. 2 weeks into the siege, our intelligence estimated that the human defenders should be running out of food and water. Their power systems should be failing, their morale breaking down. According to every military manual in the galaxy, they should have been ready to surrender. Her cybernetic hand clenched. Instead, they started playing music. Several veterans in the audience shifted uncomfortably. They remembered the stories about human psychological warfare. Every night, at exactly midnight, station time, the humans would broadcast classical music across all communication frequencies, Vex Thara said. Beautiful, haunting melodies that somehow made the vacuum of space feel even more lonely and cold. She looked directly at the young soldiers. "You have to understand. We had been away from home for months. Many of my crew were young, barely out of training. The music reminded them of their families, their lovers, their warm homes on Zephyria Prime." Her voice grew quieter. Along with the music came messages. Not threats or demands for surrender, but personal communications to individual crew members. The humans had somehow obtained detailed information about our forces and were sending messages designed to make each soldier homesick. She touched the scars on her face. To Lieutenant Kex Vor, they sent recordings of his daughter's birthday party. To Sergeant Melthana, they transmitted video of her mate tending their garden. To me, they sent a picture of my childhood home during the Festival of 3 Moons. The young soldiers stared at her in shock. This was not the kind of warfare they had been taught to expect. "How could they have obtained such personal information?" one of them asked. "That's what made it so terrifying," Vex Thara replied. "We realized the humans had been preparing for this war for much longer than we had imagined. They had infiltrated our communication networks, studied our culture, learned what would affect us most deeply on an emotional level." She stood up and began pacing, her mechanical leg clicking softly with each step. But the psychological warfare was just the beginning. The real shock came when our scouts reported that the humans were still maintaining full defensive readiness after 3 weeks of siege. Her cybernetic eye glowed brighter. They should have been weak, desperate, making mistakes due to hunger and fatigue. Instead, they were rotating guard duties with perfect discipline, maintaining their equipment with precision, and even conducting training exercises in their spare time. She stopped pacing and faced the audience. That's when we captured one of their supply drones. The cantina fell completely silent. Everyone knew this part of the story was crucial. The drone was small, designed to slip through our blockade undetected. She continued. When we analyzed its cargo, we discovered something impossible. The humans had been rationing their supplies to last for 6 months. One of the young soldiers gasped. 6 months? But that would mean they were only using a third of normal rations from the very beginning. Exactly, Vexthara said. While we were planning a siege that would last weeks, they were preparing for one that would last half a year. They had accepted from the start that this would be a long, difficult fight, and they had planned accordingly. She sat back down heavily. But even that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what we found when we finally analyzed their defensive positions properly. Her mechanical hand traced complex patterns on the table. The humans hadn't just built fortifications. They had turned the entire asteroid into a weapon. Every tunnel, every chamber, every corridor had been designed to channel attacking forces into predetermined kill zones. She looked up at the young soldiers with haunted eyes. They had been planning this defense for years, before the war even started. Every mine shaft, every storage room, every ventilation system had been modified to serve a military purpose when the time came. Her voice dropped to a whisper. That's when I realized we weren't fighting soldiers who happened to be defending a mining station. We were fighting an entire community that had chosen to become a fortress. She finished her drink and set the glass down with shaking hands. On the 35th day of the siege, we intercepted a human transmission. It was a birthday song. The defenders were celebrating someone's birthday, sharing their limited food rations to make a small cake, gathering together to maintain their spirits despite everything we had thrown at them. Her cybernetic eye dimmed. That night, I lost my first crew member to suicide. A young communications officer who couldn't handle the psychological pressure of fighting an enemy that refused to break, refused to give up, refused to act like they were supposed to. The silence in the cantina was absolute. Even the ventilation systems seemed to have gone quiet. The siege lasted 2 months, she said finally. When we finally attempted our assault, we lost 60% of our forces taking a single level of the station. The humans fought for every meter, every room, every corridor. And even when we thought we had won, they would disappear into hidden passages and attack us from behind. She stood up again, her mechanical leg whirring as it adjusted to her weight. But the most terrifying thing wasn't their resistance. It was their discipline. Even while fighting a hopeless battle against impossible odds, they maintained perfect unit cohesion. They shared supplies, protected their wounded, and never once considered abandoning each other. Her voice grew stronger. That's when I learned the second lesson about humans. They don't fight for victory. They don't fight for glory. They don't even fight for survival. They fight for each other. And that makes them the most dangerous enemy any warrior could ever face. She looked around the cantina one more time. Because, how do you defeat an enemy that values their comrades more than their own lives? The bartender had stopped pretending to work. Like everyone else in the cantina, he was completely focused on Vexthara's story. She sat quietly for several minutes, her cybernetic fingers drumming against the table in a slow, rhythmic pattern. After Titan's Gate, I thought I understood humans, she said finally. I was wrong. My real education began during the urban warfare on New Geneva. She gestured with her artificial arm toward a holographic display unit on the wall. With a thought command, she activated it and projected a 3-dimensional map of a human city. New Geneva was a civilian settlement. 2 million inhabitants, mostly families of terraforming workers and their support staff. When we arrived, our orders were simple: secure the city, establish control, minimize civilian casualties. The hologram showed a typical human city layout: residential districts, commercial areas, industrial zones, and a central government complex. It looked peaceful, almost inviting. The initial assault went exactly as planned, she continued. Our forces landed outside the city, established perimeters, and began advancing toward key strategic points. The human military units withdrew, without significant resistance, abandoning their positions, according to standard retreat protocols. Her cybernetic eye focused on the hologram as she manipulated the display to show troop movements. Within 6 hours, we controlled all major infrastructure: power plants, water treatment facilities, communication centers, and transportation hubs. Command declared the operation a complete success. She paused and took another drink. Then, the real fighting began. The young soldiers leaned forward, confused. But Commander, if you controlled all the strategic points, how could the fighting continue? Vexthara smiled grimly. Because we didn't understand what we were really facing. We thought we were fighting soldiers. Instead, we were fighting an entire population that had decided to resist. She manipulated the hologram to show individual buildings highlighted in red. The humans had turned every apartment building into a fortress. Every office complex became a sniper's nest. Every school and hospital was converted into a supply depot and medical station. Her mechanical hand gestured toward different areas of the city map. They had been preparing for urban warfare for months before we arrived. Not just the military units, but the civilian population as well. Teachers, doctors, engineers, shop owners, even children old enough to carry messages or supplies. The atmosphere in the cantina grew heavier as the veterans recognized the implications. The first sign of trouble came when one of my patrol units failed to report in, she said. We sent a rescue squad to investigate and found them trapped in what looked like a simple residential street. But the humans had modified the buildings, creating hidden passages, concealed firing positions, and elaborate trap systems. She touched the burn scars on her face. My rescue squad triggered a carefully planned ambush. The humans had been watching our movement patterns, learning our tactics, and preparing specific counters for every type of operation we attempted. Her voice grew quieter but more intense. What made it worse was that we couldn't fight back effectively. These weren't military installations we could simply destroy. They were homes, schools, hospitals filled with civilians who were somehow working together with the resistance fighters. She stood up and began pacing again, her mechanical leg creating a steady rhythm on the metal floor. The humans had created a system where civilian and military functions were completely integrated. A doctor treating our wounded in the morning would be providing intelligence to resistance fighters in the afternoon. A teacher helping refugee children would be coordinating supply lines for guerrilla operations at night. One of the young soldiers spoke up. Surely that violates the Galactic Conventions on Civilian Protection in Warfare? Technically, yes, Vexthara replied. But the humans didn't see it as a violation. They saw it as community defense. Every person in that city had chosen to contribute to the resistance in whatever way they could. But they never stopped being doctors, teachers, and parents. She stopped pacing and faced the audience directly. Do you know what it's like to be treated by an enemy medic who saves your life, then helps your captors plan their next attack against your forces? The cantina was completely silent. I found out during my 3rd week in New Geneva, she continued. My unit was caught in an explosion during a night patrol. A hidden human bomb had collapsed an entire building on top of us. Her cybernetic arm moved unconsciously to touch her artificial leg. I was trapped under the rubble with severe injuries. My squad was either dead or unconscious. I should have died in that collapsed building. She sat back down and looked directly at the young soldiers. Instead, I woke up in a human medical facility. A civilian doctor named Sarah Park had spent 8 hours performing surgery to save my life. She replaced my shattered leg with a temporary prosthetic, treated my burns, and even made sure I had enough pain medication to remain comfortable. Her voice grew softer. For 2 weeks, Dr. Park and her staff took care of me. They shared their limited medical supplies, their food rations, even their personal quarters to make sure I had a place to recover. One of the veterans at a nearby table nodded knowingly. Many of them had similar stories about human medical treatment. But here's what made it truly terrifying, Vex Thara said. While Dr. Park was saving my life, her husband was leading the resistance cell that had planted the bomb that nearly killed me in the first place. The young soldiers stared at her in shock. The humans had somehow created a culture where they could treat enemies with genuine compassion while still fighting against them with absolute determination, she explained. Dr. Park never apologized for her husband's actions, and he never apologized for hers. They had simply divided their responsibilities. She would preserve life wherever possible, and he would protect their community by any means necessary. Her cybernetic eye glowed brighter as she accessed more detailed memories. During my captivity, I watched human families continue their normal routines while also supporting military operations. Children would go to school in the morning and carry supplies to resistance fighters in the afternoon. Parents would work their civilian jobs during the day and stand guard duty at night. She manipulated the hologram again to show the complex network of tunnels and hidden passages the humans had built throughout the city. They had turned New Geneva into a single, massive organism, she said. Every person, every building, every system was connected and working together toward a common goal. Not through force or fear, but through voluntary cooperation and shared commitment. Her voice grew stronger. That's when I learned the third lesson about humans. They don't just fight as soldiers or civilians. They fight as communities, as families, as tribes that have chosen to stand together, regardless of the cost. She looked around the cantina at all the faces watching her. And when an entire community decides to fight, when every person, from children to grandparents, commits to resistance, how do you defeat something like that without destroying everything you're supposed to be protecting? Her mechanical hand closed into a fist. The answer is, you don't. You find another way. And that's exactly what the humans were counting on. She finished her drink and set the glass down carefully. Because they knew that once we understood what we were really fighting against, we would have to choose between victory and honor. And humans are very good at making you want to choose honor. Vex Thara sat back in her chair and looked around the cantina one final time. The crowd had grown larger during her story, and now included Zephyrians, Keltorians, Vrex, and even a few other species. All of them waited silently for her to continue. The war ended not because we lost, she said quietly. It ended because we realized we were becoming something we didn't want to be. She deactivated the holographic city map with a thought. After 6 months of urban fighting in New Geneva, our forces were exhausted, demoralized, and questioning everything we thought we knew about warfare. We had superior technology, better weapons, more troops, and complete control of space around the planet. Her cybernetic hand rested flat on the table, but we were losing. Not on the battlefield, but in our hearts and minds. One of the young soldiers finally found the courage to speak. How can you lose a war you're winning militarily? Vex Thara smiled sadly. Because the humans taught us that winning and conquering are two different things. We could have destroyed their cities, killed their population, and claimed their planets. But that would have made us monsters, not victors. She stood up slowly, her mechanical leg whirring as it adjusted. The final lesson came when I was released back to our forces. Dr. Park herself escorted me to the exchange point where human and Zephyrian negotiators were meeting. Her voice grew softer as she remembered. She handed me a small package before I left. Inside was a new prosthetic leg, custom designed for my specific injuries and programmed with my movement patterns. It was better than anything our own medical corps could have provided. She gestured to her artificial limb. This leg that I still wear today was made by the enemy medic who saved my life, using resources that her people desperately needed for themselves. The cantina remained completely silent as she continued. But that wasn't all. Along with the prosthetic was a message from the resistance leader, who had been trying to kill me for months. He apologized for the pain I had suffered and invited me to visit New Geneva again after the war ended, as a guest rather than an occupier. Her cybernetic eye dimmed slightly. That night, I filed a report to my commanders, recommending immediate ceasefire negotiations. So did most of my surviving officers. We had realized that we weren't fighting an enemy that could be defeated through conventional warfare. She sat back down and looked directly at the three young soldiers who had started this conversation. The humans had done something that no other species in galactic history had ever accomplished. They had turned their enemies into allies without winning a single major battle. One of the veterans at another table spoke up. "Tell them about the integration programs, Commander." Vexithara nodded. During the peace negotiations, something unprecedented happened. Instead of demanding reparations or territory, the humans proposed joint reconstruction programs. They wanted Zephyrian engineers to help rebuild the cities we had damaged. They wanted our doctors working alongside theirs in integrated medical facilities. She gestured around the cantina. This station where we're sitting right now was built by human and Zephyrian crews working together. Half the technology in this room was developed through joint research programs that came out of the peace treaty. Her mechanical fingers drummed on the table again. Wars end. But the people who fought them have to live with the consequences forever. So they decided to make those consequences positive instead of destructive. She pulled out a small communication device and activated it. The holographic display showed a message queue with dozens of unread communications. "These are messages from my former enemies," she said. "Dr. Park sends me updates about her medical research. Her husband, the resistance leader, now works with me on veteran support programs for soldiers from both sides of the conflict." The young soldiers stared at the device in amazement. "The humans taught us that the real victory in war is not defeating your enemy," she continued. "It's turning your enemy into someone who chooses to work with you toward a better future." Her voice grew stronger as she reached the conclusion of her story. "Our military now uses human-designed training programs that emphasize cooperation and community support. Our medical corps has adopted human techniques for treating trauma and helping veterans readjust to civilian life. Even our tactical manuals have been rewritten to include human concepts of honor and civilian protection." She looked around the cantina at all the different species represented in the crowd. The humans didn't just win the war. They changed what victory means for everyone in the galaxy. Just then, her communication device chimed softly. The display showed an incoming video call from Dr. Sarah Park. Vexthara's scarred face broke into the first genuine smile she had shown all evening. "Excuse me," she said to the young soldiers. "I have a call from an old friend." She stood up and walked toward a private communication booth near the back of the cantina. Before she left, she turned back to address the three young soldiers one final time. "You wanted to know what makes humans dangerous in battle?" she said. "It's not their weapons or their tactics or their technology. It's their ability to make you want to be worthy of the respect they show you." She paused at the entrance to the communication booth. "They make you want to be better than you are. They make you want to fight for something greater than just victory. And once you understand that, you realize that they haven't just won the war. They've won your heart." With that, she stepped into the booth and accepted the call. Through the transparent walls, the cantina patrons could see her talking animatedly with the human doctor who had once saved her life, both of them laughing like old friends catching up after a long separation. The three young soldiers sat in stunned silence, their earlier bravado completely forgotten. Around them, The other patrons slowly returned to their own conversations. But the atmosphere in the cantina had changed. There was a new understanding in the air. A recognition that the galaxy was a different place than it had been before humans entered the galactic community. One of the young soldiers finally spoke. "I think I need to request a transfer to the human exchange program." "We're agreeing." His companions nodded in agreement. They had come to the cantina as confident young warriors, ready to prove themselves against inferior enemies. They were leaving as thoughtful individuals who understood that the greatest strength was not the ability to defeat others, but the ability to transform enemies into allies. Outside the cantina, the stars of Kepler's rest shone down on a galaxy that was still learning the lessons that humans had taught through 3 years of terrible war. And in communication booths and meeting rooms across known space, former enemies continued to work together toward a future that none of them could have imagined before they learned what it truly meant to fight like humans.